The dust devil that swept through Trinity, Texas that scorching afternoon in July of 1874 brought with it more than just red dirt and tumbleweeds. It brought a skinny girl with hollow eyes and bones showing through her tattered dress, stumbling alongside Graham Yates's 12-year-old daughter, as if death itself was nipping at her heels. Graham had been mending the fence line when he heard hoofbeats and looked up to see his daughter Lily riding hard toward the ranch house, her chestnut mare lathered and breathing heavy. But what made his stomach drop was the sight of another figure slumped against Lily's back, barely clinging to consciousness. He dropped the wire cutters and ran, his boots kicking up clouds of Texas dust as he sprinted across the parched ground. "Papa!" Lily's voice cracked with urgency as she reined in the mare. "Papa! She needs help. I found her by the creek bed, trying to dig for water with her bare hands." Graham reached up and carefully took the girl, a young woman, he realized, into his arms. She couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds soaking wet, and her skin burned with fever beneath his calloused hands. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles, and her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. But even in her desperate state, he could see she'd been beautiful once, before whatever hardship had reduced her to this walking skeleton. "Get the door," he commanded Lily, who scrambled down from her horse and raced ahead. Graham carried the stranger up the porch steps and into the cool dimness of the house, laying her gently on the settee in the parlor. "Fetch water, but just a little at first, and get the medical kit your mother kept." His throat tightened at the mention of his late wife, Sarah, who'd been gone 3 years now from the influenza that swept through Trinity. She would have known exactly what to do, would have already been heating broth and preparing a proper bed. Graham had learned to manage the ranch and raise Lily on his own, but moments like these reminded him how much he still missed Sarah's steady presence. Lily returned with a tin cup of water, her blue eyes wide with worry. "Is she going to die, Papa?" "Not if I can help it," Graham said, though he wasn't entirely certain. He lifted the woman's head carefully and let a few drops of water touch her lips. Her eyes fluttered open gray as a winter sky, and she stared at him with such desperate gratitude that it pierced something in his chest. "Slow," he murmured, "just a little at a time." She tried to gulp the water, but he pulled the cup back. "I know you're thirsty, but you'll make yourself sick. Trust me." Over the next hour, Graham and Lily worked to bring the stranger back from the brink. They got small amounts of water into her, then some weak broth that Lily had warmed on the stove. Graham carried her upstairs to the guest room, the room that had once been meant for the siblings Lily would never have, and Lily helped get her into one of Sarah's old nightgowns after they'd sponged away the worst of the grime. "What's your name?" Lily asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding the woman's hand. The gray eyes focused on the girl, and the woman's cracked lips formed words barely above a whisper. Jane Baker. I'm Lily Yates, and this is my papa, Graham. You're safe now, Miss Jane. You're going to be all right." Jane's eyes filled with tears that traced clean paths down her dusty cheeks. "Thank you," she managed before exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep. Graham stood in the doorway, watching his daughter tend to this stranger with such gentle care, and felt pride swell in his chest. Sarah had raised a good girl, kind-hearted and brave. Not many 12-year-olds would have thought to bring home a dying woman, let alone known how to keep their head in a crisis. "You did good today, Lily girl," he said quietly. "Real good. But now let her rest. We'll check on her through the night." They left Jane sleeping and went downstairs. Graham heated up beans and cornbread for their supper, and Lily chattered about how she'd been riding along the dry creek bed looking for interesting rocks when she'd heard a sound like an animal in distress. She'd found Jane collapsed in the dust, barely conscious, with no horse or supplies anywhere in sight. "She must have been walking for days," Lily said, her voice troubled. "Papa, what do you think happened to her?" "Don't know, sweetheart. But she'll tell us when she's ready, and if she doesn't want to talk about it, that's her right. For now, we just help her get well." That night, Graham checked on Jane every few hours, bringing water and broth when she stirred. Each time he entered the room with his oil lamp, he found himself studying her features: the high cheekbones, the delicate nose, the way her dark lashes rested against her pale cheeks. She was young, probably no more than 23 or 24, and he wondered what circumstances had brought her to such a desperate state in the middle of nowhere, Texas. By the third day, Jane was strong enough to sit up and take solid food. Lily had appointed herself chief nurse and barely left the woman's side when she wasn't doing her chores. Graham would hear them talking upstairs, Lily's bright voice mixed with Jane's softer responses, and he found himself smiling at the sound. He was in the barn tending to the horses when Jane appeared in the doorway a week after her arrival. She wore one of Sarah's old calico dresses that Lily had altered to fit her slight frame, and though she was still too thin, some color had returned to her cheeks. Graham straightened from mucking out a stall, suddenly aware of how he must look covered in sweat and horse muck. "Miss Baker, you shouldn't be up yet." "I've been lying in bed for a week, Mr. Yates. I needed to move." She took a tentative step into the barn. "I wanted to thank you properly. You and Lily saved my life." "Lily did the saving," Graham said, setting aside his pitchfork. "I just followed her lead." Jane smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. "You have a remarkable daughter. She's been telling me all about the ranch, about her mother, about how you've been teaching her to rope and ride." "She's the best thing in my life," Graham said simply. "Takes after her mother in all the ways that matter. I'm sorry for your loss." Jane's voice was gentle. "Lily speaks of her mother with such love. Sarah was a good woman, best I ever knew." Graham found himself adding, "Until the fever took her, she made this house a home." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight streaming through gaps in the barn walls. Finally, Jane spoke again, her voice quieter. "I suppose you want to know what happened to me. Only if you want to tell it." Jane walked over to one of the stalls and reached out to stroke the nose of Graham's big sorrel gelding. "I was traveling with my father from Missouri to California. He'd heard there was still gold to be found, still opportunities for men willing to work hard. My mother died when I was young, so it was just the two of us." Her voice caught. "We were 3 days out from Fort Worth when we were attacked by raiders. They killed my father and took everything we had: wagon, horses, supplies, all of it. I managed to run and hide in some rocks until they left. After that, I just started walking." Graham's jaw tightened. "How long ago?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. I lost track of time. I was trying to reach Fort Worth, but I got turned around. The water I'd managed to carry ran out, and then I just kept walking because stopping meant dying." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes. "I should have died out there, Mr. Yates. Your daughter is an angel." "She's got a good heart," Graham agreed. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you have family anywhere? People who'll be worried about you?" Jane shook her head. "My father was all I had. Some cousins back in Missouri, but we weren't close. I was supposed to be starting a new life in California." Her laugh was bitter. "Seems I'll need a different plan now." Graham made a decision then, one that surprised him with its swiftness. "Stay here." Jane's eyes widened. "What?" "Stay here at the ranch. At least until you're fully recovered and can figure out what you want to do next. It's not proper for a young woman to be traveling alone anyway, not in these parts. And Lily's taken a real shine to you. Having another woman around might do her good." "Mr. Yates, I can't just impose on your hospitality. You'd earn your keep." There's plenty of work around a ranch, and Lily could use help with the household tasks. I'm fair at cooking and cleaning, but it's not my natural talent." He gave her a small smile. "Besides, you already know where the guest room is." Jane looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing the offer, considering her limited options. Finally, she nodded. "Just until I'm strong enough to find proper work in town. I won't be a burden any longer than necessary." "You're not a burden, Miss Baker. You're a guest who's going to help out around the place." When Lily learned that Jane would be staying, her whoop of joy could probably be heard in the next county. That evening at supper, the girl peppered Jane with questions about Missouri and what California was supposed to be like. And Jane answered with growing animation, her gray eyes losing some of their haunted quality. Graham watched them interact and felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. The house suddenly felt less empty, less like just a place to sleep between long days of work. Jane's laughter was different from Sarah's, lighter somehow, but it filled spaces that had been silent too long. Over the following weeks, Jane grew stronger and began taking over more of the household duties. She was an excellent cook, much better than Graham, and she had a way of organizing things that made the house run smoother. She mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden, and even helped Lily with the lessons Graham had been trying to teach her from Sarah's old school books. But more than that, Jane fit. She didn't try to replace Sarah or fill shoes that couldn't be filled. She carved out her own place in their lives with quiet competence and genuine warmth. She laughed at Graham's dry jokes and listened attentively when he talked about the ranch. She braided Lily's hair in the mornings and told stories at night that left both father and daughter hanging on every word. Graham found himself noticing things about her, the way she hummed while she worked, how she always saved the best pieces of meat for him and Lily at supper, the gentle patience she showed when teaching Lily to sew. He noticed how the dress fit her better now that she'd gained back healthy weight, how the Texas sun had given her skin a warm glow, how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. One evening in late August, Graham was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jane came out and settled into the rocking chair beside him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She passed one to him, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to crickets begin their nightly chorus. "Lily's asleep," Jane said finally. She tried to stay awake to see the stars come out, but exhaustion won. "She had a big day helping with the new calves," Graham said, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Thank you for this and for everything you do around here. Place has never run so smooth." "I like having purpose again," Jane admitted. "After my father died, I felt so lost. Being here, helping with Lily, keeping house, it's given me a reason to keep going." Graham turned to look at her profile in the fading light. "You ever think about what comes next, after you're fully recovered?" Jane was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Trinity seems like a nice town. I thought maybe I could find work there, perhaps as a seamstress or a teacher if they need one. I'm educated enough to teach the younger children reading and arithmetic." Something clenched in Graham's chest at the thought of her leaving, moving into town, becoming just someone he might see occasionally at the general store or church. When had she become so essential to his daily life? When had her presence become as natural as breathing? "That's a fine plan," he managed to say, though the words felt like dust in his mouth. Jane glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Unless you think I should stay here longer." "I don't want to overstay my welcome, but Lily did mention she'd like help preparing for the winter, and I do enjoy being at the ranch." "You're welcome here as long as you want to stay," Graham said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Lily would be heartbroken if you left, and I've gotten used to having help around the place." "Just Lily would be heartbroken?" Jane asked softly, and there was something in her voice that made Graham's heart kick against his ribs. He met her eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted his dreams more often than he wanted to admit. No, not just Lily. The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken words, possibilities hanging like stars just beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. But before either could speak again, a coyote's howl broke the moment and Jane looked away, her cheeks flushed. "I should go inside," she murmured. "Early morning tomorrow." Graham watched her go, then sat alone on the porch long into the night, wrestling with feelings he'd thought died with Sarah. Was it wrong to feel this way about Jane? Was 3 years long enough to mourn? Would Sarah have wanted him to spend the rest of his life alone? He knew the answer to that last question. Sarah had made him promise in those final fever-bright days that he would live fully after she was gone, that he would find joy again, maybe even love, and that he would make sure Lily had a mother's influence as she grew. At the time, he'd agreed just to give her peace, never really believing he'd want anyone else. But Jane wasn't trying to be anyone else. She was entirely herself, strong and gentle, resilient and kind, with shadows in her past that matched his own. She understood loss because she'd lived it. She appreciated the quiet beauty of ranch life because she'd nearly died in the wilderness. And she loved Lily with a fierceness that spoke of her good heart. Graham was falling in love with her, he realized. Maybe had been falling since that first day when he'd carried her broken body into his house and seen the fighter still burning in her eyes despite everything. The realization both terrified and exhilarated him. The next morning, Graham was shoeing a horse when Lily came running up, her face alight with excitement. "Papa, Papa, Miss Jane is teaching me to make apple pie, real pie with lattice crust and everything." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Graham said, straightening and wiping sweat from his brow. Lily hesitated, then looked up at him with an expression far too knowing for a 12-year-old. "Papa, do you like Miss Jane?" "Of course I do. She's been a great help and she's a kind person." "No, I mean do you like her like you liked Mama?" Graham's hammer nearly slipped from his fingers. "Lily, because I think Miss Jane likes you too," Lily continued earnestly. "She always makes sure your coffee is how you like it, and she fixed that tear in your good shirt even though you said it could wait, and she always smiles different when you come in from the fields." "Different how?" "Just different. Happier. The way Mama used to smile when you'd come home." Lily grabbed his hand, her small fingers squeezing tight. "Papa, I miss Mama every day, but she's been gone a long time and you're always alone. Miss Jane makes you happy, I can tell." Graham crouched down so he was eye level with his daughter. "How would you feel about that?" "If I did have feelings for Miss Jane," Lily's answer came without hesitation, "I'd feel happy. Miss Jane is wonderful and she's already like family. And Papa, I think she needs us as much as we need her. She doesn't have anyone else." Out of the mouths of babes, Graham thought, pulling his daughter into a tight hug. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lily said matter-of-factly. "You just don't always notice. Now come on, we need to get washed up for dinner." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Graham asked Jane to walk with him. They strolled toward the creek bed where Lily had found her all those weeks ago, now flowing with water from recent rains. The moon was bright overhead, turning everything silver. "I need to tell you something," Graham said, his heart hammering. "And I hope it doesn't make things awkward between us, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." Jane stopped walking and turned to face him, moonlight catching in her dark hair. "What is it?" "When Lily brought you here, I thought I was just doing the right thing, helping someone in need. But over these past weeks, you've become more than just someone we helped. You've become part of our lives, part of our family." He took a deep breath. "Jane, I have feelings for you, real feelings. I think I might be falling in love with you, and I needed you to know." Jane's hand came up to cover her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. "Graham, if you don't feel the same way, I understand. You can still stay here as long as you need, and we'll just forget I said anything. But I had to be honest with you. Life's too short and too uncertain to keep things unsaid." "You beautiful fool," Jane whispered, and then she was in his arms and he was kissing her like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I've been in love with you for weeks," Jane said, laughing and crying at the same time. "But I didn't think you could ever see me that way. I'm just the half-dead woman your daughter dragged home." "You're so much more than that," Graham said, cupping her face in his hands. "You're strong and brave and kind. You're beautiful inside and out. You make my daughter happy, and you make me remember what it's like to feel alive. Jane Baker, I want you to stay here not as a guest or a hired hand, but as my wife if you'll have me." "Are you proposing to me?" Jane asked, her voice trembling. "I know it's fast, and I know it's probably crazy, but yes. Marry me, Jane. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Let me give you the family and home you lost. Let us be your new start." Jane kissed him again, softer this time, tender and full of promise. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Graham Yates, I'll marry you." They stayed by the creek until late, talking about their future, making plans. Jane worried about what people in town might say about the quick courtship. But Graham reminded her that this was Texas in 1874. Practical concerns often outweighed social niceties, and a rancher with a young daughter taking a wife was hardly scandalous. When they returned to the house hand in hand, they found Lily sitting on the porch steps in her nightgown, grinning like the cat that got the cream. "I knew it," she crowed. "I knew you two would figure it out." "Lily Yates, you should be in bed," Graham said sternly, but he was smiling. "How could I sleep when you were out proposing to Miss Jane?" Lily ran down the steps and threw her arms around Jane's waist. "You're going to be my new mama, if that's all right with you," Jane said, kneeling down to look Lily in the eye. "I could never replace your mother, Lily. She'll always be your mama in your heart, but I promise to love you like you're my own daughter and to take care of you and your papa for as long as I live." "That's all I want," Lily said seriously. "Mama would like you, Miss Jane. She'd be happy Papa found you." The three of them sat on the porch together, talking and planning until the moon was high overhead. They decided to have a simple ceremony in town the following month, giving Jane time to make a proper dress and for Graham to arrange for the circuit preacher to perform the service. Lily appointed herself in charge of decorations and immediately began planning wildflower arrangements. The weeks before the wedding passed in a happy blur. Graham found himself whistling while he worked, something he hadn't done since before Sarah's death. Jane and Lily spent hours together sewing the wedding dress from fabric Graham bought at the general store, a beautiful cream-colored cotton with delicate blue embroidery. Word spread through Trinity that Graham Yates was remarrying, and while a few old biddies clucked their tongues about the speed of the courtship, most folks were happy for him. The owner of the general store, Mrs. Henderson, cornered Jane one afternoon and gave her a long, assessing look. "You're the girl Graham's daughter found dying in the desert, aren't you?" "Yes, madam," Jane said quietly, waiting for judgment, but Mrs. Henderson just smiled. "Then you understand how precious life is and how quickly it can be taken away. Graham Yates is a good man who's been alone too long. You make him and that little girl happy, you hear. That's all that matters." The wedding took place on a crisp September morning in the small church at the center of Trinity. Jane wore her cream dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Graham wore his Sunday best with a string tie. Lily stood beside them, holding a bouquet of prairie flowers and beaming so widely her face seemed in danger of splitting. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked Graham if he took Jane to be his lawfully wedded wife, his "I do" rang out strong and certain. Jane's voice trembled slightly with emotion when she made her vows, but her eyes never left Graham's face. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Graham pulled Jane into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the applause and whoops of their assembled neighbors. When they broke apart, Jane was blushing and laughing, and Graham felt lighter than he had in years. The townspeople had organized a small reception at the church, with donated food and even a fiddle player who knew all the old songs. Graham danced with his new wife, then with Lily, who stood on his boots like she had when she was small. Neighbors came by to offer congratulations and welcome Jane to Trinity properly. As the sun began to set, the small family headed back to the ranch in their wagon. Lily had been invited to spend the night with her friend Mary in town, giving Graham and Jane their wedding night alone. The girl hugged them both fiercely before running off to Mary's house, calling over her shoulder, "See you tomorrow, Papa. See you tomorrow, Mama." Jane caught her breath at the word, tears springing to her eyes. "She called me Mama. Is that all right?" Graham asked, suddenly worried they'd pushed too fast. "It's more than all right. It's everything." That night, in the bedroom that had been Graham's alone for 3 years, Jane became his wife in every sense of the word. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, speaking in whispered words and gentle touches. Afterward, lying in Graham's arms with her head on his chest, Jane felt truly safe for the first time since her father's death. "I keep thinking this is a dream," she murmured, "that I'll wake up still dying in the desert." "It's real," Graham assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're here, you're safe, and you're mine. We're going to build a life together, Jane. You, me, and Lily." "I want children," Jane said softly. "I want to give Lily brothers and sisters. Is that something you want too?" Graham's arm tightened around her. "I want everything with you. More children, growing old together, watching our family grow. You've given me a second chance at happiness, Jane. I'm not going to waste a moment of it." Life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Jane proved to be an excellent rancher's wife, competent and hardworking, never complaining about the long days or hard work. She and Lily were as close as if they'd been together since Lily's birth, and Graham would often find them with their heads together, giggling over some private joke. That first winter brought challenges: fences that needed constant mending, cattle that tried to stray, and a cold snap that had them all huddling near the fire at night. But they faced it together, and somehow that made even the difficult days feel like adventures. In the spring, Jane discovered she was pregnant. She told Graham one evening after supper, her eyes anxious as she watched his face. His whoop of joy and the way he swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen despite her laughing protests to be careful, told her everything she needed to know about how he felt. Lily was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a big sister. She appointed herself Jane's protector, constantly worrying that Jane was working too hard or not eating enough. Jane bore the hovering with good humor, touched by the girl's fierce love. "You know," Jane told Lily one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, "I think your mother would be proud of the young woman you're becoming. You're kind and brave and so full of love." "You really think so?" Lily asked, her voice small. "I know so. And I'm grateful every day that you found me out in that desert. You saved my life, Lily. You gave me a family when I thought I'd lost everything. I love you so much." "I love you too, Mama," Lily said, and they hugged there in the garden, surrounded by growing things and possibility. The baby came in late autumn, a healthy boy with Graham's dark hair and Jane's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Jane's father, and Lily declared him the most perfect baby ever born. Graham held his son with wonder, marveling at the tiny fingers and the way the baby already seemed to know his voice. "We made this," he whispered to Jane as she lay recovering in their bed. "We made this beautiful life together." "We did," Jane agreed, watching her husband with their son and feeling her heart might burst from happiness. "Who would have thought when your daughter brought me home that day I'd end up here, a wife, a mother, a member of a family again?" "I found a daughter that day too," Graham said. "When Lily brought you home, I saw how much love she had to give, how compassionate and brave she was. And then I found you, the woman I didn't know I was waiting for. That dusty afternoon changed everything." Life continued to unfold in beautiful, ordinary ways. Thomas grew into a toddler who followed his big sister everywhere, and Lily proved to be a patient and loving sister. 2 years after Thomas came a daughter they named Caroline, with her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. The house rang with children's laughter, and the ranch prospered under Graham's steady hand. Jane had never known such happiness was possible. Every morning she woke in Graham's arms, and every night they talked about their day, sharing dreams and memories. They made love with the comfortable passion of partners who knew each other's bodies and hearts. She watched Graham teach their children to ride and rope, saw the pride in his eyes when they accomplished something new. Lily grew into a beautiful young woman, though she insisted she was in no hurry to marry. She wanted to travel first, see something of the world beyond Trinity. Graham and Jane supported her dreams while secretly hoping she'd always come home to the ranch. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Graham surprised Jane by taking her back to the creek bed where he'd proposed. The sun was setting in shades of gold and crimson, painting the landscape in fire. "I wanted to come back here," Graham said, holding both her hands. "To the place where we first spoke our feelings. Do you remember?" "I remember every detail of that night," Jane said. "How terrified I was that you'd reject me, how my heart nearly burst when you kissed me." "These 5 years with you have been the best of my life," Graham said seriously. "You've given me joy I thought I'd never feel again, children I cherish, a home that's warm and full of love. You saved me, Jane, just as much as Lily and I saved you that day." "We saved each other," Jane corrected gently. "I was dying in more ways than just physically. I'd lost hope, lost my purpose. You and Lily gave me a reason to live again." Graham pulled her close and they stood watching the sunset, wrapped in each other's arms. In the distance, they could hear Lily calling the children in for supper, her voice carrying on the evening breeze. "We should head back," Jane said reluctantly. "In a minute," Graham murmured, kissing her temple. "I just want to hold you a little longer." They stayed until the first stars appeared. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their respective losses. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand, Jane looked at the golden light spilling from the windows and heard her children's laughter, and knew she was the luckiest woman alive. Years continued to pass in the way of all lives, sometimes easy, sometimes hard, but always together. Graham's hair gained threads of silver, and Jane developed laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. Lily eventually married a rancher's son from the next county and gave them grandchildren who visited every summer. Thomas showed a talent for working with horses and took over more of the ranch operations as Graham got older. Caroline surprised them all by becoming a schoolteacher in Trinity, though she still lived at home. On warm summer evenings, Graham and Jane would still sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Their hands, work-worn and familiar, would find each other the way they always had. "You ever think about that day?" Graham asked one evening when they were both in their 50s. "The day Lily brought you home." "Every single day," Jane admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying and how your daughter's kindness saved me. I think about how you could have just sent me on my way once I recovered, but instead you offered me a home. I think about how blessed I've been." "I'm the one who's blessed," Graham said. "You came into our lives when we needed you most. You helped heal wounds I didn't even know how to name. You gave me love when I thought that part of my life was over. You made our house a home again." "We did that together," Jane said. "All of us, you, me, Lily, our children. This family we built together is my proudest accomplishment." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Jane leaned her head on Graham's shoulder, just as she had on countless evenings before. She thought about that desperate, dying woman stumbling through the desert 5 years ago, certain her life was over. She could never have imagined the beautiful future that awaited her. Inside the house, she could hear Caroline practicing her lessons for the next school day, Thomas talking with his father about which cattle to take to market, the grandfather clock that had been Sarah's ticking steadily. These were the sounds of home, of family, of love built day by day through shared work and mutual devotion. "I love you, Graham Yates," Jane said softly. "I love you too, Jane Yates," Graham replied, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes that night by the creek. Thank you for choosing this life with me. Thank you for seeing me as more than just the starving friend your daughter brought home. Thank you for giving me a second chance at life." They sat in comfortable silence as full dark fell. Two people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way, who had built something lasting and true from the foundation of that desperate afternoon. The ranch stretched around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Inside the house, their children moved through evening routines, and somewhere in the next county, their daughter Lily was probably tucking her own children into bed. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in almost every way. But that was the beauty of it. These ordinary moments, strung together like pearls on a string, created a life of extraordinary richness. Jane had found not just survival in the arms of Graham Yates and his compassionate daughter, but a love that transformed everything. As the moon rose over the Texas plains, painting everything in silver light, Graham and Jane remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full. They had found each other in the most desperate of circumstances, and they had built a love story that would echo through generations. Their grandchildren would someday tell their own children about the day great-grandma Jane was found dying in the desert by a brave girl on a horse, and how that moment of compassion changed the course of multiple lives. But for now, in this perfect moment, they simply sat together under the stars, grateful for every day they'd been given, every challenge they'd overcome together, every joy they'd shared. The cowboy had found a daughter in Jane even as he'd found a wife, and the dying woman in the desert had found not just survival, but a love that would carry her through all the days of her life. And when they finally rose to go inside for the night, their hands still clasped, neither needed to speak the words that echoed in both their hearts. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, most enduring form. And it had all begun on a dusty Texas afternoon when a compassionate girl brought home a stranger, and her father's heart opened wide enough to let that stranger in. The end of their story wasn't really an end at all, but a continuation, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the beautiful unpredictability of life. In saving Jane, Graham and Lily had saved themselves, completing a family that had felt incomplete, filling empty spaces with laughter and love. And Jane, who had thought her life was ending in that merciless desert, had instead found it was just beginning. Together, they had built something that would outlast them all, a legacy of love, compassion, and the courage to open your heart even when it's been broken. The ranch would pass to their children and grandchildren, but more than land and cattle, they would inherit the story of how their family came to be, how a dying woman and a grieving widower and his compassionate daughter came together to create something beautiful. Years later, when Graham was gray and stooped but still strong, and Jane's hands were gnarled with age but still capable, they would walk out to that creek bed where he'd proposed, where she'd nearly died all those decades before. They would stand in the place where death had almost claimed her and life had instead embraced her, and they would give thanks for every moment they'd been granted together. "No regrets?" Graham would ask, though he knew the answer. "Not a single one," Jane would reply, smiling up at the man who'd given her everything. "Except maybe that I can't live it all over again. Then we'll just have to make the most of the time we have left," Graham would say, pulling her close. And they would, savoring every sunrise, every meal shared, every evening on the porch, every grandchild's visit. They would love each other with the fierce devotion of people who knew how precious and fragile life was, who understood that every day together was a gift not to be wasted. When Graham passed peacefully in his sleep at 73, Jane held his hand and whispered all the things she'd told him 1,000 times, but could never say enough: how he'd saved her, how he'd loved her, how their life together had been everything she'd never dared to dream. And she thanked him for that day when he could have turned her away, but instead welcomed her in, when he could have kept his heart closed, but instead dared to love again. Jane lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who adored her, never truly alone but always missing her other half. She told stories about their life together, about the day Lily found her dying in the desert, about Graham's proposal by the creek, about building a life from nothing but love and determination. And when her own time came, her last words were a smile and a whisper. "I'm coming, Graham. Wait for me." They buried her next to her husband under a shade tree on the ranch, and the whole town of Trinity came to pay respects to the woman who'd arrived as a starving stranger and left as one of their most beloved members. Lily, now a grandmother herself, stood between her siblings Thomas and Caroline, all of them crying for the woman who'd been mother to one and mama to all. "She saved us," Lily said through her tears. "She saved Papa when he didn't even know he needed saving. And Papa saved her," Thomas added. They saved each other. It was true. In the end, that dusty afternoon in July 1874 had changed everything. A compassionate girl had saved a dying woman, a grieving man had opened his heart, and together they'd built a love story that would echo through generations. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, and his children would tell their children about the great-grandparents who'd found love against all odds. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Graham and Jane Yates wasn't the land or the prosperity, or even the large, loving family they'd created. It was the lesson they'd lived every day of their lives together, that it's never too late for love, that compassion can change everything, that opening your heart despite fear and loss and past pain is always, always worth it. The creek bed where Jane had nearly died, and where Graham had later proposed, became a special place for the family. Young couples would walk there when they were courting, and children played in its waters during summer. It was a reminder that, from the driest, most desperate places, life could bloom if you were brave enough to nurture it. And sometimes, On warm summer evenings when the light turned golden and the air smelled of sage and wildflowers, people claimed they could see two figures walking hand in hand along that creek bed, a tall man and a slender woman, their heads bent together in conversation, their love as enduring as the land itself. Whether it was ghost or memory or simply the power of story, no one could say. But the message was clear. Love, once truly found, never really ends. It echoes through generations, living in the children and grandchildren, in the stories told and retold, in the very stones and soil of the place where it took root. Graham and Jane Yates had found each other when both needed saving. They'd built a life of purpose and passion, of hard work and tender moments, of laughter and tears and everything in between. They'd proven that sometimes the most desperate circumstances lead to the greatest blessings, that a dying woman in the desert could become a beloved wife and mother, that a grieving widower could love again with his whole heart. Their story became legend in Trinity, Texas, the tale of the cowboy whose daughter brought home a starving friend, and how he found a daughter and a wife that day. But to those who lived it, it was simply life, lived fully and well, with gratitude for every moment and love enough to light even the darkest days. And that, in the end, was everything.